the governing law within it. Second, dharma in the sense of scripture, doctrine, religion, as the Buddhist dharma. Third, dharma in the sense of righteousness, virtue, and piety. Fourth, dharma in the sense of elements of existence. In this sense, it is generally used in plural. 2. Buddhist teachings are profoundly wonderful dharmas. The marvelous dharma or the wonderful dharma is the wonderful law which is beyond thought or discussion. According to Paul L. Swanson in The Foundation of Thien philosophy. p.128. For chih-I, the subtle dharma refers to the way reality truly is. It is synonymous with such terms as the true aspects of reality, true reality, the middle path, and the supreme truth, and can only be described as inexpressible, beyond conceptual understanding, and subtle. There are 4 categories of oneness of the wonderful dharmas. Also according to Paul L. Swanson in The Foundation of Thien philosophy. p.127. The gist of Thien Great Master Chih-I's standpoint is that the term subtle refers to any teaching, doctrine, practice, and so forth, which includes the concept of unity or integration. This explains in the Thien classification of the 4 categories of oneness which are derived from the Ekayana teaching of the Lotus Sutra. The oneness of teaching, that all teachings of the Buddha are ultimately non-contradictory and lead to the one goal of Buddhahood. The oneness of practice, that true practice is ultimately one and for the purpose of the one goal of Buddhahood. The oneness of persons, the non-duality of the eternal Buddha and that all people ultimately will attain Buddhahood. And the oneness of reality, that reality is one. There are 4 categories of oneness of the wonderful dharmas. According to Paul L. Swanson in The Foundation of Thien philosophy. p.127. The gist of Thien Great Master Chih-I's standpoint is that the term subtle refers to any teaching, doctrine, practice, and so forth, which includes the concept of unity or integration. This explains in the Thien classification of the 4 categories of oneness which are derived from the Ekayana teaching of the Lotus Sutra. The oneness of teaching, that all teachings of the Buddha are ultimately non-contradictory and lead to the one goal of Buddhahood. The oneness of practice, that true practice is ultimately one and for the purpose of the one goal of Buddhahood. The oneness of persons, the non-duality of the eternal Buddha and that all people ultimately will attain Buddhahood. And the oneness of reality, that reality is one. After the Buddha's enlightenment, he realized. This dharma is so profound and difficult to comprehend for human beings because it is subtle and beyond any secular logic. It can be understood only by the wise. Besides, beings are always attached to sensual pleasures, and delighted by sensual pleasures. The dependent arising is a subject which is hard to see. So are the calming of all the activities, the renunciation of all attachment, the destruction of craving, dispassion, stopping, and nirvana, etc. If I were to teach this dharma, human beings would not understand me. That would be more troublesome for me. Thus, at first the Buddha did not want to teach his dharma. However, after the 3rd request of Brahma Sahampati, the Buddha decided to spread his dharma to save beings. According to the Majjhima Nikaya, Volume 26, Brahma Sahampati read the thought of the Buddha in inclining to teach the dharma. He feared that the world might be destroyed without hearing the dharma. So he approached the Buddha and requested him to preach the dharma. O Lord, may the Lord teach the dharma. May the welfarer expound the dharma. There are beings with little dust in their eyes, who, not hearing the dharma, will fall away. But if they are learners of the dharma, they will understand the dharma. In ancient times of Magadha there has appeared an impure dharma thought out by stained minds. Open this door of deathlessness, let them hear the dharma awakened to by the stainless one. Just as a man standing on the peak of a mountain might watch the people around. May the sorrowless one look down upon the people who are sunken in grief and overcome by birth and age. Rise, O conqueror in the battle, leader of the caravan. Freed from debt, walk over the world. Let the exalted one teach the dharma. There are those who will understand the dharma. After the Brahma Sahampati appealed to the Buddha for the third time, the Buddha, out of compassion for beings, surveyed the world with his Buddha vision. He saw beings with little dust in their eyes, with much dust in their eyes, with keen intellect and with dull intellect, with good character and with bad character, beings who are easy to teach and hard to teach, and few others, who, with fear, see evil and the world beyond. Thus the Buddha decided to spread his Dharma. The Brahma Sahampati thought that he himself made the opportunity for the Buddha to preach the Dharma, saluted him and passing around him to the right, then disappeared. The birth of the Buddha's teachings is the pinnacle of the Buddha's achievement. The Buddha's enlightenment was in some respects the pinnacle of his achievement, but it was his subsequent teaching of Dharma, truth, that laid the foundation for his enduring legacy. The community of monks and nuns that he established ensured the transmission of this doctrine to future generations, and in the 3rd century B.C. the reign of the Emperor Asoka played an instrumental role in the dissemination of Buddhism in India. After he had attained enlightenment, the Buddha remained for 7 weeks at the site of the Bodhi tree and enjoyed great bliss. During this period he realized that what he had come to understand was a profound and difficult truth, which other people relished worldly attachment, would find hard to grasp. According to the Buddha Dharma is simply worldly Dharma in which we turn ourselves around. It is the Dharma that most ordinary people are unwilling to use. Worldly people are sinking and floating in the worldly Dharma. They are always busy running here and there, constantly hurried and agitated. The source of all these activities is invariably selfishness, motivated by a concern to protect their own lives and properties. Buddha Dharma, on the other hand, is unselfish and public-spirited, and springs from a wish to benefit others. Sincere cultivators always think of others' welfare. Sincere cultivators always forget their own ego. They always give up their own interests in service to others, and never bring uncomfortable circumstances and afflictions to others. However, most people fail to clearly understand the basic ideas that the Buddha once preached. As a result, as we can see now, within Buddhist circles we find struggle and contention, troubles and hassles, quarrels and strife. These problems seem to be no different from that of ordinary people, if we do not want to say worse than what we can find in worldly life. The Buddha predicted all these problems. Thus he concluded that it would be pointless to try to teach others about his enlightenment. But the great god Brahma Sahampati intervened and implored the Buddha to share his discoveries with humankind. The great god Brahma Sahampati intervened and implored the Buddha to share his discoveries with humankind. Impelled by his great compassion, the Buddha decided to survey the world. He saw that beings are of different kinds. Like lotuses in a pond. Some are immersed underwater. Other grow and rest on the surface. And other again come right out of the water and stand clear. He understood that just as some people have good qualities and others bad, some would be easy to teach and others would be difficult. Because of this diversity and out of his great compassion for all beings, the Buddha changed his mind and resolved to teach. The Buddha's first sermon was addressed to the 5 ascetics who had been his companions before the Enlightenment. At the Deer Park at Sarnath, near present-day Varanasi, he explained to them the content of his enlightenment in the form of the 4 Noble Truths. These ascetics were so struck by the depth of his insight and the novelty of his message that one of them instantly became an arhat, a worthy one who attains nirvana through a Buddha's teaching. The other 4 followed suit in the days to come. This momentous first sermon, which has become one of the better-known articulations of the Buddha's teaching and of Buddhism in general, is called the setting in motion of the Wheel of Dharma. It is still celebrated in most Theravada countries in the festival called Asalha Puja, which takes place on the full moon day of the month of July. For the next 45 years, until his ultimate extinction, the Buddha taught Dharma. The number of his followers increased steadily and the community of monks, the Sangha, began to form. The Buddha himself continued wandering and begging for his food. He taught indiscriminately, talking to kings and paupers alike, and ceased traveling only in the 3 months of the rainy season. The Buddha did not appoint a successor. When his disciples asked who would lead them after his death, he retorted that they must turn to themselves and be guided by the Dharma as he had taught it to them. It would be the duty of the Sangha to maintain the Dharma when he was gone. At his death approached, the Buddha asked the assembled monks if they had any questions. The gathering remained silent. The Buddha's last words to the monks were, "All things composed are perishable. Now strive diligently." Then, lying on his right side between two sal trees, he began meditating into the many stages of his complete and final extinction. Parinirvana. After which he would never again be reborn. His body was cremated and, in accordance with his wish, the remains were divided among humans and gods. Stupas, dome-shaped funerary mounds, were erected over the relics. Stupas can be seen today at such sites as Sanchi and Amaravati in India, Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka and Borobudur in Indonesia. In Buddhism, active, conditioned, produced or functioning dharmas are all phenomena which are influenced by the production or birth, duration or existence, change, and annihilation. All conditioned states are impermanent and passing away. This is one of the four great voices of the Buddha. You should know that the myriad pains of all conditioned states are as searing as balls hot iron. Conditioned states are impermanent and pass away. Nirvana is tranquil, unfabricated well-being, beyond all burning, extinguishing all inflaming afflictions. Having heard this, sentient beings diligently practice good principles, and in the vehicle of listeners to Buddha's voice attain the tolerance of conformity to the message. All conditioned states are miserable. This is one of the four great voices of the Buddha. You all should know that all conditioned states are miserable. There is the misery of hells, the misery of animality, the misery of hungry ghosthood, the misery of lack of virtue, the misery of clinging to self and possessions, the misery of evil doing. If you want to be born human or divine, you should plant roots of goodness. Born in the human world or in a heaven, you will leave all situations in which enlightenment is difficult. Sentient beings, having heard this, give up error and perversity, practice good actions, leave all difficulties behind, and are born in the human world or in heaven. All conditioned states are without a self means the body has no self. The mind has no self. And the environment has no self. When Sakyamuni Buddha put forth the notion of no self, he upsets many concepts about life in the universe. He blasted our most firm and widespread conviction, that of a permanent self. Those who understand not self know that its function is to overthrow self, not to replace it with a new concept of reality. The notion of not self is a method, not a goal. If it becomes a concept, it must be destroyed along with all other concepts. As long as we still cling to the self, we will always have to defend ourselves, our property, our prestige, opinions, and even our words. But once we give up the belief in an independent and permanent self, we will be able to live with everyone in peace and pleasure. The Buddha taught, understanding not self is a key to great enlightenment, for the belief in a self is synonymous with ignorance, and ignorance is the most basic of the three afflictions: greed, anger, and stupidity. Once we identify, imagine, or conceive ourselves as an entity, we immediately create a schism, a separation between ourselves and the people and things around us. Once we have this conception of self, we respond to the people and things around us with either attachment or aversion. That's the real danger of the belief of a self. Thus, the rejection of the self is not only the key of the end of sufferings and afflictions, but it is also a key to the entrance of the great enlightenment. 3. Buddhist teachings are wonderful dharmas of liberation. Generally speaking, all teachings of the Buddha are aimed at releasing human beings' sufferings and afflictions in this very life. They have a function of helping individuals see the way to make arise the skillful thought, and to release the evil thought. For example, using compassion to release ill will, using detachment or